This is a podcast from BFM 89.9, the business station.
Hello, I'm Hanif Baharuddin, and you're tuned in to the show that brings you closer to the people and places of our capital city. In conjunction with International Women's Day this week, we're going to look at our built environment and whether they're designed to be sensitive enough to women. Joining me on the show via Zencaster to dissect this is Ali Sabrina Ismail, Director of Architecture from the Faculty of Built Environment and Surveying, University Technology Malaysia. We're going to start by looking at the definition of gender-sensitive architecture, a subset of architecture that focuses on eliminating bias in our design.
Okay, before I explain about women architecture, I will just give you an overview understanding what is actually the meaning of gender sensitivity architecture or gender sensitive architecture. So if you look into the concept gender sensitivity, it is actually a way to reduce the barriers that is caused by discrimination and also gender bias. So it is very important actually to create the kind of gender sensitive kind of environment, because at the end of the day, we actually want to promote the idea of mutual respect regardless of genders, especially in the built environment, or like what you mentioning just now, in public spaces. So if you look into the sustainable future under the New Urban Agenda or NUA, actually it emphasizes on that all people must have equal rights, opportunities, access to the benefits that cities can provide. So in other words, when we mention about New Urban Agenda here, it actually have a clear vision talking about inclusivity. So in this sense, it actually assures that all residents, whether you male or female without discrimination, must develop this idea of safety, accessibility, healthy, be resilient, affordable, and actually promoting the idea that can improve everyone's quality of life. So in this sense, if you read the book written by Henri Lefebvre talking about the concept of equality in city design or spaces design, it talks that whenever we create a built environment, the most important thing is that we need to mention the ideation of societal inequalities, meaning of religion, color, ethnicity, whether you are gender, male or female, and above all is that talking about the unification between all types of gender in society. And if we look into the local survey done by the latest research, mostly Malaysian populace, almost 60 to 70% of Malaysian populace actually agrees to achieve equality is important in the current environment, and it is very important because to ensure unification and harmony, especially when you live in Malaysia, there's a lot of different race and background. And also genders and also different age group. So when you were mentioning about the idea of gender sensitive awareness, so this is also very important when we talk to the group of women, or what we call female, because when we talk about female, it's actually it's most important thing, because female actually not only means like actually a very important group in society, but it's also a very kind of a sensitive kind of human being. What I'm saying is that because I'm a woman myself. So, and whenever you go to cities nowadays, most of city spaces are actually dominated by single gender group, which is like male category. And this is in sense actually did not give the ideation of sense of belonging, especially to female. So maybe after this, I will elaborate much more detail on the aspect of what are the design senses that actually we should propagate and promote, especially in providing a good sense of space for women or for female.
But I think most importantly right now, we sort of have to acknowledge that maybe, if you think about it, urban spaces, public spaces, urban environment, built environment, they're not necessarily gender neutral, right? So, yeah. What does that mean? Perhaps, when we mention that, does that mean that, in terms of looking at spaces, they're very quote unquote masculine?
Yes, it is, because if you look into Western civilization, historically, most of public places in the Western world actually were created and were identified the spaces which is actually associated for men. So, and this actually had become an evolution, and it has shown a lot of a dichotomy in throughout history, especially in designing cities and designing spaces. Because if you read books like written by Goodsell, gender roles are actually entwined within our cultural formed identities, where actually men are being expected to control the space and actually women are expected to stay at home. So this is actually a kind of ingrained ideas, or what you call that, cultural society that is inbound not only in the Western but also in the Eastern kind of society. And if you look into like Ajman, he also claims that when we go to urban cities or places like in big cities, actually there's a lot of spaces that maintains men domination. And when we talk about men, it is talk about the existing social order in society itself. So this is actually give an impact to human, especially to women in that sense, who lives in the metropolitan spaces. So most of the public spaces are centered to the design for men, and give them more emphasization and actually build up the boundaries between men and women in that sense. So if you read the book by Shirley Adner, who is also actually an author who wrote a lot about women in space, she mentioned that this is actually something that is ingrained in society, where actually there's a clear ground rules and had been established throughout the history, talking about establishing boundaries between men domain and also between the women. And whenever that we go, for instance, in big cities, it creates this kind of environment that is actually sometimes it gives a kind of an insecurity to women when they enter to certain spaces. So this is quite crucial, because actually when we talk about designing an open space, it is very critical actually to build up a space where everyone can feel safe, especially women. Because when we talk about women, when we talk about the female psychology, there are certain things that actually presented by women, and women usually feel threatened, especially when you go to a big huge area in cities where safety, the ideas of security always come to place, and the idea of where we need living in a kind of environment that is actually safe from crime hotspots, poor streetscapes, and then strangers. So these are all the things that actually gives women feeling insecure and absent in public spaces.
Alice also outlines some of the aspects that need to be prioritized when it comes to designing for women.
When I talk about designing for women, the most important thing is privatizing their safety. So in this sense, when we talk about women, the design consideration that relates to women's architecture design, especially in public spaces, is about safety. You must have a good accessibility, comfort, and the most important thing is protecting the woman's safety. That is the most crucial and important thing actually. So and creating a safe and secure space for women, it is actually a challenge, especially for designers and also for policymakers, because sometimes when you design public buildings, or when you design buildings in cities, sometimes you will have a lot of back alleys, hidden lanes, dark pathways and things like that. So this is actually will create crimes. And when we talk about crimes, it is very critical to women, because especially when you are a working woman, you come home late at night, 9 or 10, or maybe in the middle of the night after your work night shift and things like that. So you have to pass through certain pathways to go to cities, take a bus, take a tram to go back home, or train. So this is actually a critical thing, that actually when you design spaces, these are the things that you have to think. And especially designated spaces also is missing, especially in the city for women. For instance, when you talk about women, they are always being mothers. When you talk about mothers, you always have kids, you always have babies. So you have to bring them to public spaces. Sometimes you have to babysit, take care of them, and things like that. But when we talk about the planning of this public space, there are places being provided now, but actually it's not enough in that sense. And it is good if it's actually the policymakers of designers look more critically on how to design a better spaces for women, because whatever it is, women play an important role in bringing up families. So, and sometimes we cannot leave our kids at home. We have to go out and bring our kids with us. So in this sense, sometimes you need to have a place togetherness between mothers, between females and their kids or their daughters or their sons together to actually mingle within the public spaces. And another thing is that when we talk about spaces for women, friendly design spaces for women, the most important thing is that, like, I'm a woman myself also, I prefer a kind of a big, wide open space with wide entrances. So I can feel more safety when there is a lot of visibility within that space itself. So it is not like crowded or it is not like secluded and things like that. So this is very crucial also because it actually can allow flexibility also in within the spaces, and also at the end of the day, it will create this feeling of sense of belonging within the spaces for women itself, especially in cities.
Are there any examples out there that can be used to perhaps show a good design that's pretty sensitive to women?
Okay, I think there is some kind of public buildings in Malaysia actually showed this kind of initiative. Like if you go to shopping malls, the women's parking is always painted in pink color. And it is actually nearby to the entrance or to the doorways. So this is quite good actually when there is a certain kind of an awareness and community participation and understanding about the woman's needs. And also if you go to shopping malls, nowadays also the big shopping malls, they have places for women actually to take care of their child and babies, and things like that. There's a places for them. But if you look into specific things like still in offices or in like institutions and things like that, these kind of facilities are still missing for women. And the most critical thing that I would like to give an example, for instance, because I'm also doing a part of talking about women-friendly mosque design. So the most important thing that when we go to mosque, right, because mosque is actually a religious place where, especially it's going to be Ramadan soon, so women actually also want to take part to do Tarawih prayers and things like that in mosque. But sometimes when we go to mosque, the space in the mosque itself actually discriminating women in that sense. Sometimes women prayer space, you have to climb up the staircase to go up one level, but the men will have the main dominant area for praying at the main hall. But women have to climb up staircase, they have to go through ramps and they have to go to round the spaces and things like that. So, and women areas in spaces sometimes like in suraus or in mosque, actually they are not designed and fit within nice arrangement of the planning of the mosque itself. And sometimes it had an odd form to the qiblat, and sometimes it cut off the continuity at times. So when you go to certain spaces like this, it is really, really very challenging. Sometimes, also women also wants to have this feeling of participating, meet the community and things like that, and have engagement with other the societies. So it's best to have also wherever public spaces, whether it's a religious public spaces, whether it's a library, whether it's a shopping mall, it's best to actually have a dedicated space for women, because actually women also need to take part in all the society's activities, and they also need to engage with the community. So this is something that the mindset, I think, needs to change in that sense. Yeah.
That was Ali Sabrina Ismail, Director of Architecture from the Faculty of Built Environment and Surveying, University Technology Malaysia, talking about gender-sensitive architecture and the importance of good architectural design for women. We're going to make way for some messages. Stay tuned. I'm Hanif Baharuddin and you're listening to I Love KL on BFM 89.9. BFM 89.9, you're listening to I Love KL, bringing you closer to the people and places of our capital city. I'm Hanif Baharuddin. Joining me on the show today is Ali Sabrina Ismail, Director of Architecture from the Faculty of Built Environment and Surveying, University Technology Malaysia. We're talking about designing our built environment to be sensitive to women in conjunction with International Women's Day. She has outlined some key factors that need to be focused on if we want to make our architectural design to be more inclusive for women earlier on the show. Apart from safety and security, are there any other factors that we should be mindful of?
Yes, of course. When you talk about women, the main thing, crucial thing is that I mentioned is safety and security. But the other things is also talking about friendly design of women's spaces that actually can bring up this idea of sense of belonging. So this is also another crucial important thing. And when we talk about sense of belonging, is that the women's space should ensure exclusiveness, where in the public spaces it can allow that kind of some flexibility for women to participate within a huge, large engagement of group. So in this sense, a nice design of a flexible user space should also be created. So which means that even though that women sometimes need to have their private areas or their privacy areas and things like that, or maybe in kind of a safe kind of an environment, but also at the same times they want to have an open area or flexible space that actually can engage them with the society and create more dynamic activities with other group, with other genders, or with children, with the elderlies and things like that. So this is actually very important to build up this greater connection of women to the community. And you know that when I talk about women spaces, there's still less, especially when in big buildings or in big cities, because when you go to most of places, for instance, women actually will actually be put at the side, and the planning of a social space is actually collided with each other, and it's actually meant for men dominate or male dominate. So in this sense, it is very critical to have a lot of social setting spaces that can create spontaneous kind of a gatherings with women that actually can occur at any time and also at any place. So it's best to have a lot of pocket spaces, resting areas that can encourage social interaction between women.
What about spaces like houses, for example? Like sometimes when you think about the home, I think we tend to, I guess, assume that it's gonna be designed to be inclusive for all, but that's not necessarily the case, right?
Yes, it is. Because if you talk about residential areas, I'm taking example of residential areas. The way how residential areas or housing areas are designed, actually, for instance, I give you the example of park design in residential areas. Usually, when in the evenings, you go to your olden days, like the days of a traditional Malay house, for instance, or the Malay kampong, the woman usually at the evening after they are tired cooking and things like that, they will actually sit in the veranda within the woman community, and they start to have this like kopi sembang place for them to sit down and talk, just to chit chat, maybe one or 2 3 hours, just to get them stressed out, relaxed and things like that. But unfortunately, if you look into residential living, especially in the modern urban context, there is no spaces for that. For what I'm saying is that for women to sit down and talk together with neighbors or within their female friends and things like that. This is because the way how the residential houses are designed in rows, and when you have parks, the parks or the playground are actually far from their house. So it's quite hard for them to go and meet their friends and things like that. So this actually diminish the ideation of culture, where we have in our old traditional days, if you look into the movies like Piramli movies, or like Kampung movies, and you will always see that this kind of experience actually occurs, especially in the women community. But nowadays, we don't have that. So we don't have a specific space that actually can build this social connection. So at the end of the day, how does women express their feeling, their emotion is actually through Facebook, through all these digital social media things. And at the end of the day, sometimes it gives this kind of a psychological effect to women. And sometimes we do feel stressed out, because it's best for you to communicate openly and have a face-to-face discussion, and get involved in activities that actually can trigger your cognitive, your physical development and things like that. But nowadays, in the modern living, we are missing that kind of environment. So it is quite sad to see that, because when there is no community spaces, they will actually give less sensitivity to this idea of what we call unification, unity among society, especially to the women community.
Yeah, based on our discussion so far, it seems like I think there is a need to recognize this. Is the field already recognizing this at the moment?
The ideation of feminism, or what we call that, woman architecture design, actually there has been a lot of debates and intellectual discourse, especially in the West. But if you look into the Eastern context, especially in the Malaysian environment itself, not much actually research has been done or study has been done actually talking about architecture design for women, or talking about gender sensitivity in that sense. And like what I mentioned earlier, talking about the surveys that has been done previously, there's not much studies actually or research mentioning about these ideas. So, and everybody were looking at it as something that is not important, but actually it is something important in society, because when we talk about women now, in terms of population, a woman is actually has a bit higher kind of a population compared to men. Am I right, Hanif? Because if you go to a lot of higher education institution, it is more like female dominant rather than male dominant. So in this sense, I think there should be some certain kind of an awareness or understanding in creating these spaces. Because at the end of the day, when you talk about female architecture design, it won't be actually for female only, but it will be more like a gender sensitivity that is actually exclusive for all in that sense. So this is the things that I think the community need to change their mindset first and have certain kind of an awareness, and maybe it has to go from the bottom up kind of an approach rather than top down kind of approach. So it has to start from the understanding of the society. You have to get a lot of more groups discussing about it and things like that. And if you look into the studies also, if you talk about Malaysia is actually placed 51st out of 113 countries in the world that take part in this study, talking about awareness on women and also gender equality. So this is quite crucial, especially in Malaysia. So I hope that certain kind of awareness actually should be bring forward, especially by the big groups that represent not only women but also the community.
You mentioned just now that it perhaps needs a bottom-up approach. How do we go about that? And, how do we start raising the awareness of the importance of women-sensitive design in architecture?
It has to start from community participation first. I think the awareness has to come from education. Education is also very important. So we need to stress the importance of community living, especially in the education system, and then actually educate, especially the community itself, by doing a lot of campaigns, intellectual discourse, open talk, some sort like a discussion, group discussion, and talk about more about the ideation of a gender sensitivity architecture to society. Last time when we talk about gender sensitivity, everybody is quite sensitive about it, and they try to run away from the issue. But nowadays, when we talk about, as we live in the 21st century, a lot of things has changed. And if you look into the design of the cities, it's everything is fast paced with the modern technologies and things like that. So I think it's high time to do a lot of research and to have more like awareness dialogues, actually, to encourage all members of the community to know their role and importance, especially these women needs in society.
All right. So I think to a certain extent, the awareness is beginning to be there. I think, like you mentioned earlier in our conversation, how certain public spaces are beginning to be a bit more aware and are trying to be a bit more inclusive to women. But what else can we do? And, what are some other spaces that can be perhaps focused on if we were to improve the situation further?
Well, the thing that if you go to big cities like shopping malls and things like that, the awareness, the sense of awareness is there. Like what I'm saying, the basic thing, like ladies car park. 10, 20 years ago, there is no specific pink car park actually at the basement if you go to shopping malls. But nowadays, if you go to big shopping malls, the sensitivity kind of towards female are there actually for women's spaces. And if you go to the shopping malls also, there are actually spaces for women and to to care for their kids, nurseries, small nurseries and things like that. But this thing, it has to be more. So I think it cannot stop there, but the initiative and actually the understanding and actually the effort should be more, actually, especially from developers, from authorities, from designers, from all walks of life. So meaning that when you design a mosque, for instance, when you design a surau, when you design rest and R&R areas, especially in along the highways and things like that, it's something basic things, but the understanding should be there. And when you're designing a park, maybe there's a kind of a separated space, especially for female or to sit down to relax and things like that. So, and especially if you go to public transport areas like LRTs, and you go to bus stations and things. So they should actually have more spaces for women. So the way how to design it is actually there's a lot of effort that has been done in the West that actually we can take example, like having wider areas, using bright white lightings, having a large pathways and also secured gated pathways with cameras and things like that, actually to monitor in terms of surveillance. So sometimes the initiative can be very, very basic, but at the end of the day, the most important thing is that the awareness has to come into action. Not only awareness, but also action is very important on how to change the design mindset.
All right. So, you're in academia. What's the situation there in terms of having these conversations? Talking about it, and also, I guess to a certain extent, inculcating the shift in mindset among students. Is it happening?
Yes, because nowadays when we talk about architecture school, where actually I'm also a part of it, being an academia, is that we actually try to train students and give them some basic awareness. Whenever you design something, the most important key point is that you're designing for the community. So in this sense that we are not designing for somebody specific, that somebody who has the biggest authority. But at the end of the day, when we talk about architecture, it's an architecture for all. So it's an architecture for the people. So that is where the senses has to come and build in, especially among the young children or the young students before they become professional architects and designers. So, and at this stage is that we always give them an awareness and projects designed where talking about universal design, sensitivity not only for women but also for the disabled people, for the elderlies and things like that. So this is quite crucial because if the young generation did not understand about human behavior or human psychology, they will at the end of the day intend to become selfish individuals, become individuals who only think about themselves and don't have feelings about others or empathy toward others. So that's why the basic thing is that sometimes it has to start from home, Hanif. So home education is very, very crucial. So meaning that how you teach your kids about the ideas of respecting others, be grateful to others, how to appreciate and respect others, not only women, not only men, but to all walks of society and to all human beings. So this is also the most important thing that you have to give sense to children, also to students, and also when they go up to work in the working environment, the ingrain of this culture should be there. So I think if we start slowly, at the end of the day, Malaysia will become a nice place to live in, not only for women but to all walks of life and to all gender. Yeah.
You've been tuning in to I Love KL, and that was Ali Sabrina Ismail, Director of Architecture from the Faculty of Built Environment and Surveying, University Technology Malaysia, and we've been talking about gender-sensitive architecture and inclusive design for women in our built environment in conjunction with International Women's Day this week. That's all we have for this episode of I Love KL. If you miss any part of the show, you can check out the podcast at bfm.my/ilovekl, our app which you can find via Google Play and the App Store, and you can also find this podcast and many others on Spotify. Don't forget to also follow the station on Twitter at BFM Radio. My name is Hanif Baharuddin, and you have been tuning in to I Love KL, bringing you closer to the people and places of our capital city. Join us again next week only on BFM 89.9, the business station.
You have been listening to a podcast from BFM 89.9, the business station. For more stories of the same kind, download the BFM app.